Good morning, everyone. We'll give it a minute or two to let a couple of folks just join into the call. We'll probably start off now. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Affordable Housing Electrification Training Series. My name is Angel Rodriguez. I am the Senior Sustainability Program Associate here at the Partnership. Today, we're excited to dive into our third session of the series, which is all about planning and financing all-electric rehabs. And the panelists we have with us today will be sharing some key insights on planning and financing strategies for retrofitting existing buildings, and we'll also be highlighting major decarb programs that could help you secure funding for these important upgrades. And as we look ahead, you'll notice that we also got one final session next week as part of our series on the 26th, which is next Thursday. And this will focus on understanding electrification technology from the operations and maintenance perspective. So be sure to join us for that as we'll put our series to an end. Go to the next slide. And so before we dive in, I want to take a moment to recognize and thank the key contributors to this training series. First and foremost, a huge thank you to our financial sponsors, the Wells Fargo Foundation and Energy Efficiency for All. We're truly grateful for your support. And I'd also like to give a special shout out to our program partners, which include the Low-Income Weatherization Program, also known as LIWP, the SOMO program, Solar on Multifamily Affordable Housing, and the BUILD program, Building Initiative for Low Emissions Development, and the CAMR program, the Comprehensive Affordable Multifamily Retrofit Program. So we are very grateful to each of these programs and their support to multifamily projects statewide. And as a heads up, this session is being recorded and the PowerPoint slides will be shared after our training. So in case there's any information that you'd like to reference or keep kind of just a tab on, we'll be sharing this information after our session. So keep a lookout for that. And we'll also aim to leave a couple minutes at the end of our session to address any questions or comments you may have. So please feel free to use the Q&A feature that we have on Zoom and submit any questions you may have. So we'll be monitoring that throughout our presentation and respond to some via chat. If not, we'll answer them live at the end of our session here. And so to kick off today's session, I'm happy to introduce two awesome speakers. Joining us is Aladia Rodriguez, the Vice President of Human Capital and Chief Operating Officer at the East LA Community Corporation, also known as ELACC. In her role, Aladia has led and overseen ELACC's programs focusing on professional development, program growth, campaign initiatives. So with years of experience, she's been very involved with retrofit programs in ELACC's portfolio, and overall playing a key role in supporting the installation of these energy efficiency measures across their buildings. And we are also joined here today by Jake Tisinger, Senior Program Manager at the Association for Energy Affordability, also known as AEA. Ever since 2010, Jake has been actively involved with a lot of these programs and policies, and has been a key player in delivering these programs across multiple clients statewide and different utility territories. So even though we're virtual, let's imagine a huge round of applause for both of them as their work does not go unrecognized, and we're grateful to have them here with us today. Go to the next slide. So planning and financing all electric rehabs. You may ask yourself, what funding is available out there? Does my project qualify? Can I leverage in more than one program? Is technical assistance free? So you might have a lot of questions as you start to start this journey on seeing what rebate programs are out there are available. So we'll be diving into all the information throughout our presentation and also serve as a resource in case you're interested in learning more. So program incentives and rebates, as you begin this whole journey on rebates and incentives, There are different program incentives and rebates available across the state. You'll notice that there are a couple of key factors to consider when choosing which ones to enroll into, as no single program kind of fits every project. It's more of a project by project basis and seeing what will be eligible within that project in specific. So each program comes with its own specific rules, say, requirements, its own guidelines, and so that may limit the options you have available. So things like the location, if there's a certain measure type you're interested in pursuing, the property type, if it's an existing building, new construction, and also taking into account the funding timeline. So is there some sort of timeline for the program? Are there deadlines that you have to meet in order to be considered for these rebates? So definitely keeping an eye for these timelines that are out there. And Jake will actually be going more into detail about this topic shortly. But I just wanted to highlight that reviewing these factors is one of the first steps into the planning which projects to finance, as it is important to kind of assess these details to ensure that the programs meet your project's needs. And in case you're unsure, our team can help guide you in the right direction and seeing how to start off and seeing which which programs are available. If not, the assigned technical analyst would also be able to further support you in the leveraging process and seeing the funding available. And so kind of staying on the topic of considerations, here are just a few more important ones listed that involve more of the team and tenants once you're actively engaged. So the first item we have here listed is for asset management team should prioritize considering is there's available replacement reserves or will there be a need to leverage in other programs to help minimize the funding gap. The next bullet point we have here is planning to secure funding and manage programmatic timelines. So the energy efficiency rebates, tax credits, federal or state funding, maybe some local funding, kind of taking into account the timelines that I mentioned earlier in terms of everything's kind of aligned and coordinated to kind of come into one place. The next one here is the size of portfolio and prioritizing certain properties. So let's say there's a abundant amount of older projects that require more urgent upgrades. Some of the things that you want to consider is seeing which projects need more of upgrades for the measures to be included into scope of work and seeing what is more needed. The next one we have here is the benchmarking/energy audit. So tools such as the Energy Star Portfolio Manager to assist the technical analysts on analyzing the building's energy performance and assessing the building systems. So oftentimes with benchmarking, the team would oversee these reports to kind of see the stance of the building envelope, and seeing how it's performing at its current state. And then with that, we'll kind of provide more assistance on developing a comprehensive scope of work that would be best suited for the site. The next bullet point we have here is tenant and community engagement. So definitely providing that transparency with tenants and ensuring that they are aware of these upgrades that will be made. So even though they're not going to be involved with the paperwork and the planning and the process of the rebate program, providing that transparency on the plan would help them kind of be more aware and prepared for what's to come, and kind of highlighting the main things to these programs and increasing the health and lifestyle of each unit. And then lastly, just monitoring post-retrofit performance. So keeping track of the progress, measuring results, so the utility consumption, water usage, and kind of just comparing the before and after of these upgrades and seeing how it's made a difference. And if not, if there's ever any issue that came across any specific measure, that is something that could be reported to the technical analyst, and they'll be able to provide further assistance on addressing that. And so in terms of what the participation process looks like, I would say that a majority of these programs do share a similar timeline. By enrolling a project into its respective program, it initiates an application into its system. And that would officially be the launch off to starting the rebate program. And by filling out an interest form, these applications typically ask more of the property information, contact information, and more of the generic property details to just kind of have the project into our system. And the assigned contact will then provide in detailed information on the program, review eligibility, sign program forms that would then allow the project to officially go on to technical assistance. And so once you're at the technical assistance state, we'll go more with the property logistics, site visits, energy audits, physical needs assessments, provide scope of work, incentives. So I would say a lot of the major work comes once a technical analyst is assigned. And through that, once everything's kind of discussed and the scope of work has been reviewed, that's when the reservation comes into play. So officially signing off and reserving the incentives and agreeing to comply with the program requirements. So kind of preparing as well for construction when it's with its designated contractor. And then lastly, to claim the incentive, when it comes to claiming the incentive, the timing can vary depending on the program. Some programs offer incentives on specific milestones that are reached during the process, while others provide the incentive only after construction is fully completed. So for example, programs like LIWP and CAMR will provide the incentive once construction is completed, but programs like TEC are measured based and they'll tend to provide the incentive upon purchasing the equipment. So it kind of varies, but overall, at the end of it, once construction is complete, that's when the incentive is claimed. And so here at the partnership, our sustainability team currently provides support with the intake and implementation of 3 rebate programs for existing buildings. And we will soon actively conduct outreach and intake for the new Equitable Building Decarbonization Program, which is expected to launch mid-2025. So to kind of quickly capture the main details on eligibility, each of these programs require that at least 66% of the units be at or below the 80% TMI. And you'll also notice that these programs vary on location and types of measures. So for example, SOMA is a program specifically designed for solar and multifamily projects in IOU territories and provides incentives on tenants and common areas. But this program also has the option to co-leverage with other rebates that can incentivize energy efficiency and electrification and create a more comprehensive scope of work for that specific project. So now when it comes to programs like LIWP and CAMR, they not only offer incentives for solar, but also provide electrification and energy efficiency measures all within one single program. So these provide the measures and solar into the scope of work if you're interested. Yeah, overall, however, what's even more beneficial in these programs is that it's still a lot for co-leveraging with other incentives and just kind of helping maximizing savings and creating a greater impact for your project. And as for the EBD program, this is a new direct install program funded by the California Energy Commission. So with the budget allocated for the next 5 years, this program will install energy efficiency, electrification, equipment, and related upgrades and no cost. So definitely be sure to be on the lookout for this program, as we'll be releasing more information as that becomes available. But yeah, so mid-2025 is to keep a lookout for this program. And so now I'll be handing it over to Aladia, who will be speaking more in depth on the decarb planning, the portfolio, financing, contractor selection, and the overall engagement with tenants during these upgrades. So without further ado, Aladia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Angel, and welcome everybody. I'm happy to be here. I am with East LA Community Corporation. We're a nonprofit, community-based nonprofit in East LA area. Our service area is the Boyle Heights area and all the unincorporated East LA areas. That's primarily where we focus. We focus on economic and social justice by doing affordable housing. We also have community spaces. A lot of our work is geared around new construction of low-income housing tax credit properties and the preservation of properties within our community. More recently, we've gone into working on climate justice work, which is how we got into the decarbonization space, but we're also looking at green spaces. So assessing the underutilized spaces within our portfolio and creating green spaces, community gardens, microforests, those type of work. We also provide community services. Most of it is geared around asset and wealth building programs, so financial empowerment to both businesses and individuals. We have a first-time home buyer program. We are a HUD-approved housing counseling agency that does home counseling, foreclosure prevention counseling, rental counseling. Other services is our resident services, our tax preparation work that we do for community, and we've started to get into the accessory dwelling units work, providing education to the community on that. And we also offer Affordable Housing 101 education to help our community navigate how to apply for affordable housing or prepare themselves. So next slide, please. So I just want to share with you that when ELACC started this work, we knew very little about decarbonization. We actually also have a portfolio that is, some of our assets are doing well, some of them are not, but we know that we want all of our properties to have climate resilience technology. And we also knew that in order to stabilize the property, we need to figure out how to improve operating costs. So our primary goals when we started this was to leverage resources, existing resources, to help improve our tenants' homes. We wanted to figure out how we can make operating costs less, because it's hard to continually say that we're going to raise rents when our community's income is not changing. And then there is a lot of technical advisory services out there for these climate resources, and we wanted to benefit from that. So to be successful, what we had to do was we had to set ourselves up as making sure that we had organizational buy-in. I took lead on this. I am an executive within the organization, but anyone within the organization can take lead. There just has to be organizational buy-in. We led this work with our asset and property management teams. We did not add another scope of work to our real estate development team. So we've been leading this through those two teams. We have limited resources, so we had to hire on a full-time summer intern who then continued part-time with the organization. But that really helped get us kick-started into this work. And we also made sure that regularly we had some organized meetings with asset and property management to make sure there was some interconnectedness happening. And we created a central filing system and made sure that each department or staff knew their roles and responsibilities to make this program a success. One of the other things that was helpful for us is we had to partner with organizations that knew net zero technologies and green financing. We are part of a local cohort that's called the Retrofit LA cohort. We've been working together for the last 2 years. We peer learn with each other. We explore, and AEA is part of this as well, but we take a lot of our lessons learned and help support each other through the different phases of decarbonization. Our partners are Sacento Group, CHPC, AEA, and IPC. Next slide. So we piloted 2 projects. We chose 2 projects because these 2 projects are fully owned by ELACC. The first one is Lorena Terrace. We've completed the year 15. It was built in 2006, 49 units in 4 different buildings, fully occupied. We started planning this project in August 2022. It did take us about 12 months to get to a place where we were ready to start implementing a scope of work and had finalized our scope of work. So it took about 12 months to go through that process. We ended up approving for the scope of work low flow aerators and shower heads, LED lighting, in-unit and common area mini splits, in-unit and common area heat pump water heaters, and dishwashers. What we learned is that the equipment needed to be ordered early on. It did take several months for the equipment to come in. So although we were ready to start rehab, we couldn't start until the equipment arrived in April. And it is taking us 6 to 9 months to complete the rehab. We'll complete it in October. You'll see the stacking and the cost for this property, but the total retrofit is at about 1.6 million. We were able to stack different incentives and grants. And the stacking was a lot of technical assistance provided by AEA. We're not experts in the different incentive programs, and so they were able to help us make sure we were qualified for the maximum of each of those programs. And then the total bid for this project did come out at 2.5. We would have had about $1 million gap, so we had to remove induction cooktop. So ELACC sizes its scope of work to the incentives we're receiving. We do not need relocation, and it's about 80% complete. Next slide. The next property is Vallejo. This is a small multifamily property that we acquired in 2017. It is 2 buildings, 17 units, very older building. All units are occupied. In this building, we are fully decarbonizing, but what we've learned is that because this building is so much older, in order to even decarbonize, we need to do a full electrical rewiring. You'll see the approved scope of work very similar to the other one, except this one does include induction cooking and electrical upgrades. We had a gap until we started planning in August 2022. We had a gap until recently this year where we were able to secure additional tech funding, and we'll be starting the rehab on this project in October. And it must be completed by March, end of March of next year, so that we can meet the timelines of our incentives. We do not expect relocation on this project either. Next. So I'm going to start sharing a little bit about how we got started. We had to first, well, I shared with you, we did some planning organizationally, but then we had to review all of our portfolio. We do have about 27 assets. We started to list them out. We created templates for ourselves. We listed assets, you'll see by address, which utility agencies serve them, when they were built, the size. A lot of this information is exactly what you'll need when you're applying for incentives. So it's good to create a central place for it. Then we started to list other information about who pays utilities, whether it's tenant versus owner. We had to gather our affordability covenants. We had to search for plans if we had them. We didn't have them. And any old physical needs assessments, we started doing that. At this phase, I would also recommend, if you're not doing it, start benchmarking some of your properties, especially those that are on your higher priority list. I shared that we chose 2 properties fully owned by ELACC, so it made the approval process so much easier. But once you decide which properties are best for you, I've heard from folks that they choose properties based on knowing that it has a better cash or that there are replacement reserves available. Whatever your priorities are, but once you select your properties, submit for incentives so that then you can begin receiving your technical advice. Next slide. Financing. Start financing early as well, just thinking internally amongst your teams, maybe starting to research what financing is available. So you'll, like I said, you'll want to apply for LIWP and CAMR to just get a general idea of what you qualify under those programs, but you also want to know your reserves on your property. What approvals do you need to use those reserves? Does your organization have a rehab fund? What is the internal process within your organization for rehab project management? And then you want to also understand how you can manage your organization's funds so that you don't always have a lot of cash out during rehab. Things about your property you'll want to know is, what's your property's NOI? Can the property support additional annual debt? Are there limits to obtaining secondary financing within your property's agreements? What we started out is trying to have within ourselves a $1.5 million rehab fund. And that's because we were moving 2 projects along. What you'll need to know is some projected savings from your projects, the greenhouse gas emissions that are going to be averted, and you'll definitely want to know the timeline of the incentives, LIWP and CAMR, once you get your reservations. What we are doing as an organization is we are actually obtaining a loan for our decarbonization work. It's going to be a revolving credit facility that will be secured by the assignment of the incentives. AEA is playing a really great role with us in that they are both helping us manage the contractor and the installation of the equipment to better manage risk. We are also, ELACC as an organization is only moving forward with projects where we have no tail, where we have secured sufficient grants or incentives for the scope of work, which means we might need to size down the scope of work to be able to move forward. And then as we're doing it, we elected a line of credit because we only have to do 1 origination fee, and the interest is paid only as we draw down on funds, and then we can repay it back. But there is right now no source to pay for origination fee and interest. So it is a thing to think about when you're moving forward with financing. And the lender for your loan will also want to know what contractor you've selected and their experience. I am also participating in a cohort that's SURE, Sustainable Underwriting for Resilience and Efficiency. Together, we are trying to create some underwriting standards for decarbonization loans. Next slide. We're now in the rehab phase. We've identified our scope of work, and it's time to select our contractor. Here, I recommend that you create a list of potential contractors: GC, electrical engineer, environmental, architectural. And then at this point, you start conducting any necessary testing that might be needed in your RFP. Lead and asbestos might be needed. You should also include in your bid, your RFP package, the minimum performance requirements. That's what we did because the LIWP summary is very thorough, gives a lot of details on the equipment and what needs, so the bidders can give you some great costs. I would also recommend you do a mandatory walkthrough. We invited AEA to join that walkthrough so that they can also help answer any contractor questions. I shared before, we sized our scope to meet the incentives. So when we had our bids back, we had 2 contractors that we worked closely with to see how they can adjust scope of work if we took a couple of things out or added a couple of things in. And then that worked out well, and that helped us identify the right scope of work for the property. It's also important to know and let the potential contractors know early on that there is a varied inspection process for this. AEA can share once you get into this, but AEA inspects the property, building and safety does, and a lot of photos do need to be taken of before and after pictures. And another thing for the contractors is let them know your expectations early on, the behaviors that they need to have, because these units are tenant occupied, communication that needs to happen, and any notice templates that you'll be sending out. For your older buildings, we've noticed that anything older than 2000 will likely need an electrical load study. So that did take us a bit longer than expected. So I'd recommend those older buildings doing some kind of electrical load study. All right, next slide. Rehab implementation, I'm gonna go through this because I've reached my time. I'm so sorry, but takes 6 to 9 months. Early on, create a rough installation plan with property management contractor. You do need a site, you need a place on site for equipment storing, a staging area. You must keep the site clean. You need before and after photos of all the equipment being installed. Order the equipment early. It cannot be ordered off the shelf. Electrical equipment is taking about 8 months. If in the city of LA, you will need a tenant habitability plan, and I'm sure this is in other cities across the state. Communication is key. Constantly keep property management, AEA, ownership, contractor, all in the same loop, and the expectation that all are supposed to keep themselves informed and support each other as challenges arise. Utilities do need to be back on before the end of the day. And then the permitting process, get it in as soon as possible for Lorena and Vallejo. We did have to submit for mechanical, plumbing, electrical, and buildings. And then if you are using incentives and they have a strict timeline and your permits are taking a bit longer, what I recommend is using those permits that have been approved to start your project early. For Vallejo, we're going to start doing windows because the electrical permit is taking a bit longer, but we want to be able to demonstrate that we're starting that project. Next slide. Tenant engagement. So this has been really key for us. We strongly believe in making sure that our tenants are comfortable with this and that they know what is happening. So create your tenant engagement plan early on. Let tenants ask and let tenants decide what is their preferred method of communication. We send massive text messages out to them. We also post flyers and we have regular meetings with our tenants. Engage the supportive services team early, let them know what's happening, and also just should keep them updated on, make sure everyone has strong communication with tenants and is listening to them. If you do gotta draft a tenant habitability plan, draft it in collaboration with contractor and property management. Some trainings that we do are just decarbonization 101. We do let our tenants know exactly what are the changes within their buildings, and we have meetings to keep them informed. We invite the contractor to our meetings and we listen to our tenants. Some things that the tenants are always asking is how much they expect to save. So you'll want to have a general idea or be able to answer that for them. Things to do early on before you start. What we've learned is help tenants understand that the installation design may not always be what we thought because it might need to be adjusted slightly to pass inspection. The rehab doesn't always go as scheduled. So although you say you might be in their unit on a Friday, you might not be able to actually go there until a Monday because of something. Prepare tenants for multiple inspections. There's state, city, and AEA is inspecting. And after the first few installations, allow your tenants to come share their experience with others that are going to get it inspected. We have partnered with UC Berkeley to do pre and post surveys with our tenants so that we can make sure and know if our programs or what we're doing is really supporting their needs. And I think that's it. Yes. So I pass it on to Jake. Thank you, everybody.
Great. Thanks, Aladia. And hello, everyone. Jake Tisinger. I'm a senior program manager at AEA, and I'm going to talk to you today about retrofits and applying for incentives in California's programs. Next slide. AEA is the Association for Energy Affordability. We have a New York office, but our office out here is in Emeryville, based in the Bay Area. We implement decarbonization programs primarily in multifamily affordable housing. We do have some single family and new construction also. Also involved in research and development, policy, and workforce training. Next slide. Today I'm going to go over a few different topics, give you a sense of the landscape of incentives and rebates available, walk through the typical affordable multifamily retrofit process for energy upgrades, and then go through some considerations as you're getting started on this work. Next slide. Thanks. We'll go ahead and get started with the affordable multifamily incentives in California. So the good news for anybody pursuing energy efficiency and decarbonization incentives in California is there are lots and lots of different programs and funding available. And this is a much better situation than a lot of other states throughout the country. And we also have access, of course, to federal funds that are made available. On the flip side of that, there are lots of different types of programs. As Angel went through earlier, the eligibility for those programs don't always align. So it can be quite a web trying to figure out which programs you may be eligible for or not. Next slide. Some of those eligibility criteria programs will be available to you depending on the geography where your building is located. Different funding will depend on the property type or the building type. We do a lot of retrofit programs, as I mentioned, and we do a lot of programs within low income space, but there is funding for new construction and general market as well, and single family. Measure types, lots of different measure types I'll go through on a later slide. Funding timelines is something that is worth considering as you're looking to combine multiple programs together. There are some programs that are multiple years, others have annual goals and budgets that need to be adhered to. Some can come up and just be a short term or a pilot. Not that you necessarily need to be on top of all of these things, just knowing generally there are lots of different program types and some pair well with others. Next slide. So this slide is intended to show the variety of funding sources and program types. Incentive programs are offered from community choice aggregators. Those would be your MCE, East Bay Clean Energy, things like that. Renewable energy networks like BayREN, 3C-REN, SoCalREN. There's municipal utilities who run their own programs. So SMUD and LADWP are a couple examples. IOUs like PG&E and SoCalEd also have programs. And then state agencies like CSD, who runs LIWP, the CEC, California Energy Commission, and then Public Utilities Commission. There's some funding from air quality management districts like the South Coast Air Quality Management District and the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. And then finally, as mentioned, there's federal funding that will come through also, as well as financing that's made available. And we listed here a handful of those different programs. If I were to list every single program, we wouldn't be able to read or see this slide at all because there really are so many on there. But the good news is for a lot of these, if you just start with one, we look to pair as many programs as we can for you so that you can maximize your incentive and understand some of those requirements that may impact your timeline. So if there's a funding source that's ending in 2024, probably not going to roll that into a program that you're applying for now, for example. Next slide. So what do these programs actually incentivize? Some of the common measures through different scopes. We have there on the right a table that shows both new construction and existing buildings and some of the types of measures that are covered. A lot of the measures that we do through the programs we implement, space conditioning, so that's typically heat pumps, be those split system, mini split, or package terminal heat pumps. Those can be central or common or in unit. Water heating, typically heat pump water heaters, and those can be both central or unitary, as well as the measures related to those, so pipe insulation, recirculation controls, low flow measures, through programs like LIWP that are comprehensive type programs. All those additional measures are also eligible. We also offer cooking, so that's typically induction ovens. This can be a measure that a lot of times if you're electrifying the space conditioning as well as the water heating, sometimes there's not enough capacity on site to be able to handle induction ovens. And sometimes those will get cut from the scope, set aside as a later measure. A lot of this gets, the final scope will be based on what sort of electric capacity is on site, as well as budget, timeline, things like that. Lighting is also available, as well as envelope measures like insulation, solar PV. Some programs do offer incentives for electrical upgrades themselves. So sometimes if you need to upgrade the panel, for example, there can be a discrete incentive for that upgrade that's needed. And of course, some programs also incorporate battery storage. Next slide. So next I'll go through what is our typical process and timeline for multifamily retrofits. Next slide. Adalia gave you a great example of a real project, a case study that they're working on right now. There's lots of great information to glean from that. These projects can look, they're very different across different programs, across different regions, building types, funding streams. There's a very large variety of projects that can come through. What I tried to do here is capture for a project that is interested in applying for maybe one program, what are kind of the typical timelines that they may see, and what are the steps that a project going through any number of incentive programs will typically go through. The blue boxes are intended to be the actions that a property owner would really be taking the lead on. The gray would be those that an implementer like AEA would take the lead on. Of course, you're involved in all of these, but just to give you a sense of whose turn it is for that individual step. So if you're starting from scratch, looking to do a project now, and expecting, when might I complete a project like this? When might I get paid? A typical timeline can be somewhere between 1 to 2 years. We've seen projects that go faster than that. And of course, we see a lot of projects that move not as quickly as the 2-year. Lots of different factors that can impact that. The ability for property owner to be resourced to have staff to coordinate on decision making, provide documentation, and really help project manage what can be fairly complex projects, especially if you're doing portfolio level upgrades. How much capital is available now, and knowing the requirements related to how you can use that for these retrofits. The electrical upgrades that are needed. Sometimes if there are upgrades needed that require the utility to act, of course, those timelines are now on the utilities end, and those aren't always known ahead of time. The costs related to those aren't always known either. So by the time you do decide maybe you want to move forward with a scope, you find out it needs electrical upgrade. You have to then work through the process and timeline for identifying how long it may take to complete those electrical upgrades, what the cost may be. And you might need to find additional funding for that, especially if it's a large cost or the programs you're applying for don't offer incentives for it. And finally, equipment availability and contractor capacity. There can be highly customized scopes of work for this that require specialized equipment that isn't just off the shelf type of things that could be bought. So those have to be ordered, and different timelines related to that, as well as how busy contractors are who have the knowledge and capacity to carry out this type of scope. And I think we could go into the next slide. Angel, you did a good job earlier of covering kind of those main steps when you're moving through an application. So just wanted to use that last slide to give you a sense of what those big steps are. So this slide here, key decisions when you're looking to complete energy retrofits like this. Are you interested in taking a look at your entire portfolio or maybe a specific property? If you have a property where you're already planning to do other upgrades, not related to the energy, or you have some failing systems that you're having to replace one by one, maybe you have a need to apply for an incentive program for a very specific property for a specific need, and that project is going to move a lot more quickly than if you're taking a look at, say, a 20 building portfolio and trying to understand the opportunities for all those buildings. Knowing how much funding you do have available upfront, that may inform whether or not you're going to pursue financing. That'll inform how many different programs you may need to stack to ultimately get as close as possible to covering that construction cost. Understanding the metering situation, so who pays for the electric and the gas within the different units. Electrification scopes obviously shift costs from the gas meter to the electric side. So if that's going to impact the tenants, it'll be really important to have tenant engagement and education around those upgrades. And certainly if you're pursuing these scopes in general, when and where you can install solar PV, that'll be your way to mitigate some of those shifted costs. Finally, if you do know the existing electrical capacity on site, or just knowing that you'll need to look into that when you're considering an upgrade, that's going to be pretty critical to these scopes moving forward. Next slide. I won't go too much into this. Adalia did a good job covering it, and I spoke to it a bit already. Just knowing a lot of these programs do stack, and when you submit an application to an implementer, the goal of ours is really to make sure we can identify all of the available incentives to you and be the ones who really understand the timelines and the requirements for those funding types. So if you're feeling overwhelmed with all those programs, don't worry about that. That's our job to make sure we stay on top of those things and communicate that to you when you do submit a project into us. Next slide. Just a last slide here. I know there's a separate series on GGRF in general, but if you're considering it, since that sort of funding is coming up soon, GGRF is the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. In this case, I'm speaking about the federal funding that comes through the EPA. There is a California bucket of funds also, but we're not talking about that here. This funding, there's several different awards and types of funding that will be available. The most important thing maybe to know about this is that a lot of these do relate to establishing financing for these types of projects, and less about specific funding for projects that you're doing. So not really incentive funding as much as it is the ability to reduce interest rates on different loan products that could be available to you. But they are something to know that within the next year or so, a lot of those details will be coming out. And this is funding that will be available. There are reporting requirements that'll come along with that. So it's most likely that it will require Davis-Bacon for a lot of the work being done, prevailing wage for the scope. So just knowing that there are going to be federal requirements related to those funding that may impact your interest to pursue that funding, or if you're looking for, a shorter term project or one that may not need financing at all, may not be the best fit. Just knowing that that's coming out and keeping your eye on what those requirements are something to consider as you're looking into these types of upgrades in general. And next slide. So as I was mentioning, the most important thing for you all, don't worry too much about all these different projects, but now's the time to get started. Don't feel like you need to have all of these things lined up. We'll walk you through this process after you do submit an interest form. These are good things to keep in mind to make sure there's organizational buy-in, to Adalia's point. But if you're curious about any of these funding types, here's a few programs here where you submit an interest form and the team will be able to take care of you and get you started on the journey. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Jake and Aladia, for this great presentation. Now we'll dive into a couple of questions that we have received in the Q&A chat box. So let me see real quick right here. So one question we have here is, to what extent can these programs be used together? Jake,
Do you want me to take that one, Angel?
Yeah, yeah, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, sure. So I can give you an example of a couple different stacking types, program stacking types. The main limitation here is that you can't have multiple programs that are coming from the same funding source or the same reporting source to be used at the same time. But most of the programs I mentioned here, that's not an issue. So one example of a program stack could look kind of like, I believe, ELACC's with what Adalia was talking about. You can layer the Low-Income Weatherization Program with the Comprehensive Affordable Multifamily Retrofit Program, CAMR, as well as tech. Mayhap is another funding source. So Adalia used at least four, and I think maybe more in there on some of her projects. A lot of times where it doesn't work, for example, LADWP has a PV program related to CAMR, and LIWP does too. You wouldn't be able to use both of those PV programs together. You'd have to pick one or the other. Or you'd have to use SOMA in place of either of those. Sorry, SOMA's only IOUs are, but if you're pairing SOMA and LIWP, for example, you wouldn't use both PV programs, one or the other.
Another question we have here, for the affordability requirement, is that existing in place affordability restrictions or future? So for a lot of these programs, the affordability requirements they have listed are already set in stone. I will say a lot of the main ones look at the AMI requirement, and it has been very common for it to be at the 66% of units at or below the 80% AMI. However, that may shift with certain programs, but in terms of the requirements, they kind of vary too. Some might have a unit requirement, some might require certain documents, such as a regulatory agreement. But yeah, oftentimes these programs, the affordability requirements, the restrictions they have in place are set in stone. And another question we have here, Adalia, someone had asked about your project here. Oh, never mind. I think it kind of disappeared. Uh, Jake, I have this question. Do these grants cover labor, soft or hard cost, or only materials?
Yeah, excellent question. I think across all of the programs I mentioned, or at least majority of them, um, the the costs can be a combination of the material and labor and electrical upgrades or some minor alterations in a lot of cases needed to support that equipment. So it's intended to cover really most of those costs. The only place where you may get into an issue is if there are upgrades being done at the same time for which there's not energy savings related to them, and therefore we couldn't derive an incentive for that. But sometimes there's funding for those non-energy incentives too. It kind of varies, and we would talk you through what those options are when we're finalizing that scope of work so that you knew going into preparing a bid or requesting a bid to be prepared that, okay, this is a measure that we may have to pay outside of these incentive programs, or we don't want to pursue it because there's not an incentive.
Mm.
Hope that helps.
And if I can add to that, we've learned that we cannot use any of these funds either for origination fees or loan interest.
Okay, then the next question we have here, uh, let's see. Between LIWP and CEC, which one would make more sense in the context of a planned comprehensive gut rehab? Jake, would you like to take this question?
Yeah, I think it depends, but so if it's a gut rehab, I guess what it comes down to, we may have to follow up on that one because there is a threshold where a retrofit becomes considered new construction and isn't then eligible for retrofits. I'm less familiar with that specific threshold and knowing on the LIWP side, but I think based on what you're asking, more likely it would qualify for LIWP. It just depends on that nuance. And yeah, happy to follow up with you on that afterward if that's something you're interested in.
Another question we have here is what kind of income documentation is required for tenants? Is self-reporting sufficient? So a lot of these programs will require the regulatory agreement. However, some of these programs do provide some flexibility if a regulatory agreement is not present. So, for example, the CAMR program does have an income documentation pathway, which probably go more over the rent roll. So it kind of it's more at a higher level, and it wouldn't really be requesting income specific per unit. Uh, but yeah, I think overall, Jay, correct me if I'm wrong here, but a lot of times it's the regulatory agreement that would be the main document that would kind of take into account the eligibility criteria, making sure it's reaching that as well.
Yeah, definitely. That's the easiest way to qualify. If you don't have a regulatory agreement in place, some of these programs, I think you're either not eligible or it's a little higher bar to then get into. But there is, I know with CAMR, you can provide a rent roll if you don't have a regulatory agreement. And then I think you just must be in a DAC in those cases.
Mhm. Another question we have here is under the SOMA program, if an existing building needs a new roof before they can install rooftop solar, would SOMA also cover the cost of the new roof?
I think I would have to follow up on that one too. I think it's not explicitly intended to cover the cost of a new roof, but there may be okay. It sounds like Rachel may be able to jump in on this.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Rachel Diaz helped to implement the SOMA program. SOMA can cover a portion of the roof costs or the roof replacement costs. The portion of the roof that will be used to directly support and house the solar system can be incentivized or rebated through SOMA. But the portion that's not directly supporting a solar system will not be. But we're currently exploring other grant opportunities, perhaps through Solar for All, to kind of mitigate some of that roof cost.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm running short on time right now. Adalia, I have a question for you here. So it's for ELACC projects. What was the cost that the property paid for, or was the loan taken out to pay for the decarbonization? I'm trying to find out if decarbonization/electrification can be done solely from the rebates and stacking all these programs without incurring any additional costs to the property.
We're actually just working on our loan right now, but the origination fees are going to be somewhere around 15,000, and it's a one-time origination fee over a 3-year period. And we're estimating interest on each of our projects to be somewhere around 15 to 20,000, only because we're only holding it out for about 6 to 9 months. And so those are kind of the parameters that we're working around. So we have to pay up front, which means we'll draw down on loans when we get our first draw. We're working it in a way where our draws are only about 2 or 3 max throughout the period.
Thank you. So due to the interest of time, we'll move on to just close off on our electrification training series. Let me see. Once again, as a quick reminder, we do have our last and final session of the training series next Thursday on the 26th on understanding electrification technology, operations, and maintenance. So definitely feel free to join us as we close off on our series. You're more than welcome to come in and learn more about that. But we would also be providing the recordings at PowerPoints for those who won't be able to make it. And then as well, once again, thank you to our sponsors and program partners. the Wells Fargo Foundation, the Energy Efficiency for All, LIWP, SOMA, Build, and CAMR program. Thank you again for all your efforts. And yeah, thank you, Aladia, Jake, and the CHP team behind the scenes for this great session today. I hope everyone has a great rest of the day, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, everybody.